Dumelang, welcome to Face the Nation. My name is Nhlamulo. Great to have you with us here on SABC News. On the show tonight, the MK party is no longer blue-ticking the ANC. The party has released a statement this evening confirming that it has had coalition engagements with the African National Congress and will meet again soon with an open mind. But they say in that statement that they'll be prioritizing the aspirations and inspirations of the South African majority and blacks in particular in those negotiations. This comes after the ANC said yesterday that the MK party hasn't responded positively to their advances. So what has changed the MK party's mind? And are they still going to go into these discussions with the demand that President Cyril Ramaphosa step down? What are their conditions? We'll speak to the party spokesperson, Nhlamulo Ndhlela. Also on the show, the ANC's highest decision-making body between conferences, that's the NEC, is about to conclude its marathon meeting this evening. It's the first meeting since the election result that saw the party's support drop to 40%. The big issue on the agenda has been coalition talks. Which party or parties the ANC must talk to in order to form a new government? We'll reflect on that with the SACP General Secretary, Mapaila. Plus, are investors being centered more than the people in our conversation about a viable coalition? Yes, we need to care about markets and investors and how they react, because ultimately that has an impact on the day-to-day lives of the people on the ground. But do the people who voted come secondary in the consideration? How do we balance the interests of the markets and the interests of the people who expressed themselves through the ballot? Professor Nhlamulo Ndhlela is going to join us for that conversation. And then later, we're going to wrap up the show with a conversation about party lists. The Chief Justice and Parliament have today received the final list of members of Parliament and members of the provincial legislatures from the IEC. So what happens next? When can we expect the first sitting of the National Assembly? And what happens if members of the MK party don't attend it as they have threatened? And can parties even change their lists now that they have officially been handed over by the IEC? The Secretary to Parliament, George, will join us. But first, my comment. So, voting is done. Parties are now discussing who to work with to form a government. That government, whichever way it will be structured, will be held accountable by Parliament. Well, at least that's the expectation in as far as the Constitution goes. It has to be held accountable by Parliament, which has now received the final list of members who will represent us as voters and their parties in the National Assembly as well as provincial legislatures. Here's what the Secretary to Parliament, George, had to say earlier today at the handover ceremony.
Esteemed Chief Justice, I assure you and all South Africans that we are fully prepared to meet the challenges and responsibilities that lie ahead. Our commitment is to uphold the values of our democracy, to serve the people of South Africa with dedication, and to ensure that their electoral choices and voices are reflected in the Parliament for the next 5 years.
He speaks about Parliament upholding the values of our democracy and serving the people of this country with dedication. But is that what MPs are going to do as they step into the 7th Parliament? Because previously some members of Parliament were more interested in serving their parties, whether the position their parties were taking was wrong or right, because they felt they were in Parliament on the ticket of their parties, which is true. But what some members of Parliament forget sometimes is that when they take that oath of office, as they are being sworn in, they swear allegiance to the Constitution and not their parties. And we've seen Parliament drop the ball on Nkandla when the Constitutional Court found Parliament failed to hold the executive accountable. We've seen Parliament drop the ball on Bosasa when the ANC abused its majority to block investigating the company. We've seen Parliament drop the ball on state capture. Remember, the state capture inquiry found that the weaknesses in parliamentary oversight and executive accountability had, over time, contributed to corruption and maladministration in government. So I hope the people that political parties are sending to Parliament understand their roles and responsibilities. Parliament is an essential cornerstone of our democracy. We need it to be effective in its oversight responsibility over the executive. So here's what I'm asking you tonight. With 400 people now headed to Parliament, what are you expecting from the new players like the MK Party, Rise Mzansi, Action SA, the Patriotic Alliance, BOSA and others? Do you think their addition to Parliament will help strengthen accountability over the executive, or are you expecting more of the same? What do you want these members of Parliament to prioritize? You can send us a WhatsApp voice note on 078 459 1897. Remember to tell us your name and surname and where you are sending that voice note from. Alternatively, you can send us an X on @FaceTheNation SABC. All right, let's start with news just in tonight. A statement coming from the MK Party confirming that they have had engagements with the African National Congress, and they're saying that they'll be meeting with the ANC again soon with an open mind. The spokesperson for the MK Party is Nhlamulo Ndhlela, who joins us now via Zoom. Nhlamulo, good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us on Face the Nation tonight. First of all, the ANC yesterday said you were blue-ticking them. You were not responding positively to their advances. What's changed your mind? How did you end up meeting with them?
No, nothing has. Good evening to yourself and good evening to your listeners, or your viewers rather. Look, nothing has changed any position or our mind. Here's the reality. At the ROC, the IEC ROC, we received what I'd call overtures from leaders of the ANC that approached us, I guess trying to get a sense of whether we're approachable and open and willing to engage in discussions, of which we made it clear that absolutely we're willing to engage. A number of our party leaders have received calls, WhatsApps, and so on and so forth from leaders of the ANC, and particularly those who sit in the NEC. But the reality is the following. We've never received a formal invite or in the form of a letter that says, we want to have discussions and engage in coalition talks with yourselves. Mm-hmm. That has not happened as yet.
So your statement tonight says that you have had engagements with the ANC. You are going to have further engagements soon. Are you able to tell us what you were able to touch on so far in these initial engagements?
No, engagements do not necessarily mean a meeting where we sit across the table with them. Engagements mean exactly what I'm referring to. These are overtures. These are just engagements where, they've called us, they've called certain leaders of our party, to get a sense as to what the climate is to engage in discussions. And that's just been that. We have not received a formal letter. We have communicated. I myself know that I met with one of the leaders within the NEC and said, let's quell these perceptions that we are seemingly arrogant and not willing to engage in discussions. No, we're willing to engage in discussions. The question is, can they formalize it? And that's what we're waiting for. If they send us a letter in the form of a request to engage, we'll engage accordingly.
As the MK Party, are you still standing by what has largely been reported as a condition you have before even sitting down with the African National Congress, which is that President Cyril Ramaphosa would have to step down? Is it still, if at all it was your condition, is it still something you're going into these discussions with?
Let me clarify the following. We said we want to engage with the ANC of Cyril Ramaphosa. What that means is that the ANC has passed policies at their conferences that they have not implemented under this administration. So we can't be engaging on the basis of having to now discuss the implementation of policies that ought to have been implemented to date. The question is, even their own policies they've not implemented. Mm-hmm. The South African people don't have the time to be waiting for points of order or for discussions around whose policy is better. We must implement. So We are saying we won't engage with a Cyril Ramaphosa-led ANC that doesn't deliver on policies. If we're going to engage, and we will engage with an open mind, remember, what's important is that we are willing to engage, but we will not engage with a position of, discussing whether policy should be implemented or not. We are saying policies must be implemented.
But Cyril Ramaphosa is not the ANC. He's not the only person who takes responsibility for the failure to even implement some of the party's policy positions that were taken in its conferences. I mean, is that fair to say the responsibility solely lands on his desk?
Is he not the leader of the party?
He is, and the buck stops with him. But the point I'm making is you can remove Cyril Ramaphosa, but the other top 7 leaders.
Taken a position, Clement, the party has taken a position on policies. They must implement those policies to liberate our people. They've not implemented those.
Yeah, and that's the party. It's not Cyril Ramaphosa, is it?
He is the leader, isn't he?
He is. So what are you saying then as the MK party? So for as long as he's the leader of the African National Congress, because under his leadership there are certain policies, for instance, that have not progressed, have not been implemented, and therefore you will not engage with him as the leader of the organization?
We said to you we'll engage with the ANC. The same way the ANC, as I've mentioned, has made overtures, and we've requested that they engage us formally, and we're willing to engage. We're willing to engage in discussions. There must not be a perception that's created that we are arrogant and not willing to engage. That is a lie. It's a misconception. Mkhonto Wesizwe has been appointed by the people, in as much as we believe that it's not the true will of the people, because we know that there are certain votes that were supposed to come our way which are not there, not reflecting the same results that have been declared by the IEC. But what we're saying is that it does not stop us, whilst we're working on a concurrent engagement legally and exercising our avenues, that we can't engage with political parties. We'll engage with political parties, whether it be the ANC or any other political party.
That's
our position.
What's on the table for you? What are your conditions? The EFF has made it clear about what it expects when it sits down, what their position is on things that would have to be met and agreed on before they get into any kind of partnership. What is it for you as the MK party? What are your conditions for any agreement you will get into with any of the parties?
Look, here's the reality. Firstly, are the votes reflective of our position or the people's will? Our position is that it's no. Hence, we take in the legal element. Because naturally, what determines whether you go into any discussion, whether it be a coalition or a negotiation, is determined by the kind of votes that you've received. Now, are the votes that we are told to have been told to have received a true reflection of what the people's will is? Our position is no. So, hence we're dealing with that separately. The issue, as it pertains to our conditions, firstly, are we in a position, in light of what we believe is not a true reflection, to be engaging in even discussions? Because remember, what determines whether you go into a coalition is your numbers. And what we're saying is that our numbers don't tally according to how we know we ought to be placed, whether it be the winning party or the official opposition. I mean, you can't tell us that the DA has got a bigger constituency than Mkhonto Wesizwe. Far from reality. We know, based on the objectives that we've raised, for instance, when it comes to KZN, that the IEC has not taken seriously. We should be sitting at about 58%.
Have you provided that evidence
from even internally?
Have you provided that evidence? When are you going to court so that they can help clarify and look at your evidence and make a judgment on this matter?
Oh, well, look, we're engaging this matter on an urgent basis. It's a serious matter. I mean, our attorneys have been engaging and having discussions and reviewing all paperwork and the evidence that we've shared with them since Sunday.
Okay, so soon we're going to see the matter in court, because it doesn't help us hearing you as a political party making allegations of vote rigging and votes that have been stolen when in fact the matter is not clarified. So are you saying that soon, as the MK party, will see the matter playing out in court, with you having provided the relevant evidence?
Well, we're confident that our evidence points to voter rigging. Vote rigging. That's it. So, yes, and remember, why would we take in this position to even go to court if we're not confident with our position and the information we received?
Yeah, it'll help when the matter is in court, because then we're able to assess and the judges can assess that evidence. Let me ask about the Democratic Alliance. When you say we're going to be engaging with other political parties, are you also open to meeting with the DA?
Look, we've heard the DA refer to a government of national unity. Government of national unity, I mean, those were terms, and maybe let's educate South Africans and bring them into context here. Government of national unity were terms and words that were bandied about in 1994 when there was discussions around CODESA, where it was the attempt thereof of using such terminology was to say that we should now, as South Africans, abandon fighting and taking militant positions and more so, find a way of unifying to advance the country. That's what you call the government of national unity at the time. We're saying right now, like we said, that MK party then was built at the time, 1961, formed to take back the country by way of the bullet. Today we're saying that this MK party is formed to take back the country by way of the ballot. So the use of words such as government of national unity is a misconception. In actual fact, if you look at what has happened for the past 30 years under the same constitution, which continues to protect those that have had the gains of apartheid.
All right, but are you meeting with the DA?
Indication.
But the question I'm asking is, are you willing to sit down with the DA when you say...
No, we're not meeting with the DA. I'm just saying to you.
Okay.
We're not meeting with the DA. Why would we meet with the DA on the basis of exactly the fact that they go against our policies and
that's clarified.
Ideology?
Just lastly, before I let you go, let's talk about Parliament. There are some of your members who have indicated that you will not be participating in the National Assembly, in the first sitting of the National Assembly that will be electing the president. Is that still your position as the MK party?
Why would we not want to represent our people? Of course we have to represent our people. That's why we're elected. In the same way, we're saying that we have to engage with other political parties on the basis of exactly the fact that we're elected to ensure that we represent our people. But it does not negate the fact that we are questioning the issue of the votes allocated against us.
So as the MK party, your members of parliament are going to be there on the first sitting of parliament that will be electing a president?
Yes, but not even those that you see that are expelled. We have to obviously amend that accordingly.
Well, so if you haven't amended it by now, the deadline is passed.
No, but I mean, I know that the deadline is passed. I'm telling you, based on the email that we've sent and the communication that we've sent to the Secretary of Parliament, that the likes of Jabulani Khumalo have been expelled. How is it possible that he can go and represent us in Parliament?
Okay.
Yes.
MK Party spokesperson Nhlamulo Ndhlela, thank you for clarifying that for us. So they will be going to Parliament in that first sitting. There are some MK Party members who were suggesting that they will not be participating because they thought somehow that is going to affect the election of the new president. The rules have since been explained that that's not necessarily the case. And as you hear there from Nhlamulo Ndhlela, the position the party is now taking is that they will be in Parliament with their 58 members of Parliament in that first sitting of the National Assembly. We're going to take a quick ad break. When we come back, we reflect on that ANC-NEC meeting currently underway in Boksburg. The SACP's General Secretary, Mapaila, is going to chat to us. Stay with us. Welcome back. The South African Communist Party says it will not support a coalition government that includes the Democratic Alliance. The comments by the SACP come as its alliance partner, the ANC, has confirmed that it has met with 6 other parties, including the DA, to discuss issues relating to government coalitions heading into the 7th administration. The ANC-NEC is currently deliberating and hopefully making a decision on how it will constitute a government. President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected, in fact, to make the closing address after that NEC meeting this evening. Joining us in studio tonight is the SACP General Secretary, Mapaila. Thank you, Soli, for making time for us. Let's start with the new developments tonight. The MK Party has released a statement a couple of minutes ago saying, we have engaged with the ANC. The agreement is that they will be meeting with the ANC very soon with an open mind. As the SACP, are you keen on the ANC considering working with the MK party?
Ideally not, because the MK party, not the MK, which is quite wrong that they are allowed to use the word MK, not MK party. They've been responsible for the loss that the ANC has suffered, for dividing the ANC, for deepening factionalism, largely led by forces of state capture and criminal networks that were fought against, that had rejected the renewal of the ANC. And it is in that regard that if the ANC, just for the sake of ruling, goes into coalitions with such parties, it will not progress. So fundamentally, we're opposed to that. It doesn't mean that when they're in parliament, depending on what they say about key questions, they can engage all parties to support, say, for instance, the land question. If they're committed to that in parliament, let's see. But there's no need for coalition with them in that regard.
So where does that leave the African National Congress? Because you also don't want them to get into a coalition with the Democratic Alliance.
Yes, the Democratic Alliance, it's part of the forces that are responsible for the poverty in this country, for the inequalities in this country. They are forces of capital that has over the years beholden the ANC to itself and didn't allow, on the basis of scaring us with the concept of international markets, who are basically their proxies. They are the proxies of international capital in South Africa. And because of that, we have been tributating, timing on one spot without radical interventions to transform our society. We've been residual in our programs. And I think this is an opportunity that we can be out of the clutches of international and local capital and do our own things in terms of the primary policy of the ANC, the Freedom Charter, and many other manifestos that we have adopted. So the ANC must just shake off its fears. It has no obligation now to international capital. Capital itself funded this DA and other opposition parties to kick out the ANC. And unless it wakes up now, there will be a different form of revolution to advance transformation of South Africa, because poverty will never be ended by the status quo that will be a consequence of its relationship with the DA in coalition. These are two diametrically opposed institutions in terms of policy-wise, in terms of where we should be going. For instance, I mean, just from the campaign platform, the DA was rejecting black economic empowerment, for instance. The process to basically address the inequalities of the past, a minimum program. It's not even a fundamental program that they were opposed to that. They were rejecting the introduction. They said they will reverse the minimum wage, for instance. They even went to have a press conference in front of Kosato House, basically to advance this notion. They are talking about dealing with the public service. In this country today, we need more teachers, we need more nurses, we need more police, we need many other public servants because of the expanding of our, the increase in our society and the services that are required in our communities. But they see government purely as a business platform.
There are other arrangements that can be worked on that would not see the DA's partnership with the ANC compromise on their policies. For instance, if the Democratic Alliance is given key positions in Parliament, that's something that is also an option where they can take the position of Speaker of Parliament, they can take the chairpersonships of the different committees in Parliament, and they still allow government to lead and the ANC to lead in terms of the executive. Do you think that arrangement still compromises on the very essence and principles of the African National Congress?
Fundamentally. I mean, are we going to put up the land question, legislation on the land question under the DA? It's not going to happen. So you can't give them the legislature. It's impossible. In fact, fundamentally, the ANC must just leave the DA. They were opposing national health insurance. a critical policy for all the people of this country. It has no responsibility as the DA for the people of this country. It may speak so, but we in the movement have, and we have demonstrated that over the years, including many sacrifices for the liberation struggle that we have ultimately achieved through a democratic breakthrough of 1994. That's why we didn't call 1994 as the party freedom. We call it democratic breakthrough because it only allowed us opportunity to transform society. But to the extent that international capital, with using its own proxies of monopoly capital in South Africa, have made it difficult for us to transform society in the manner that it was supposed to be. So you're not going to have, it will be a very major error to give the DA legislature of this country. So the ANC must be responsible as elected as the majority party to put up appropriate legislation. Let the other parties oppose such legislation that the ANC would have put up.
What happens if the ANC actually decides the DA is the party to go with, especially if you want stability, and I say that in inverted commas, stability over the next 5 years? What position do you take then as the SACP?
Then they will have drank the poison of the DA, the poison of neoliberalism and of austerity. It will be the ANC that will die. So it's like, you know, they will take the poison and think that the DA will die.
Do you want to be associated with a party that's taken that kind of poison?
We won't be associated with that. In
So
fact,
you'll walk
it will
away
be a
from the
class
alliance?
suicide. From our PB yesterday, we indicated that if the ANC were to make such an error, a gross error of this nature, we will have to convene a special consultative forum of the Communist Party to review the nature of our alliance with the ANC.
What do you think, because the ANC finds itself probably between the rock and hard place here, in that when one, as the SACP, you're saying be careful on your engagements with the MK party for the reasons you've outlined, and you say don't even talk to the Democratic Alliance. Now they're left with the economic freedom fighters, and of course they can bring in the IFP or any of the other smaller parties. What happens if the EFF has conditions like they already have, that we want the Ministry of Finance, we want the Speaker of Parliament? Do you think those are fair for the ANC to accept as conditions?
Well, the ANC has not won the elections. We're just the leading party. So that's the basis why they must engage other parties. But you engage parties that you share at least common ground. For instance, parties that are committed to change property relations in this country. For instance, to transfer the land, which is the primary source of poverty in this country. Because under the DA, which runs a capitalist system, they don't want to tell you what causes poverty in the country. They have now turned it around, as we have seen recently, and create an impression that the ANC is the cause of poverty in this country, which is not the case. And I don't understand why the ANC want to take responsibility for capital, for instance, when capital itself has now rejected the ANC because it feels that ANC can no longer guarantee profitability. Because capital's main task is to make profit at whatever cost. It makes profit even on the death of people, on disease of people. That is why it is the capitalist forces that stood up to reject the national health insurance that must be enjoyed by every other South African. That is a better health care for every other South African. Even though that private sector, by the way, is been more funded by the state, by the public purse, than the public purse funds public health system. This is the reality. And I think that it is in this regard that the people who are voting, the majority who are voting, are now blaming the ANC because it's in government. And if you take responsibility to govern, take this responsibility seriously. Don't undermine this responsibility. I mean, how do you have this stalemate now where you are free from capitalist clutches and you want to hand back power to the capitalist forces?
There are other people who make the argument that the majority of people in this country have voted for the African National Congress and of course the Democratic Alliance, in that these are the top two biggest parties in the country. And the argument they make is, if the two come together, isn't that the will of the people?
No. In fact, the majority of the people of our country have voted for parties outside the framework of neoliberalism, parties that do not support austerity. They've rejected them fundamentally. parties like Action SA, BOSA, they've been fundamentally rejected, including the DA itself. It's been fundamentally rejected. That is why the ANC must look into the left spectrum of the voters and see where the cries of the people are. Without responding to that reality, then we'll not be able to transform society. And the DA is not a solution for it. The DA, it's hammering on the hidden hand of the market, that they will influence the international market forces. The international market forces, once the ANC decide what to do, they will return back, because the international market forces, they still invest even in war zone areas. We're not in a war zone. Why should we continue to back the capitalist forces in this country at the expense of our people? So that is why this question of a party that is responsible only in the main for white interest, and it has postured itself as if it's responsible for anyone because of either some weaknesses in the ANC and so forth. It must just deal with those weaknesses and govern properly.
When you talk about parties that have been rejected, I mean, you're not mentioning the EFF there. I mean, they didn't grow.
But no party that is in parliament has grown, by the way.
Yes, but what I'm saying is, if you're saying...
That's the point, all of them. ANC, DA, even
the
DA
MK
declined,
party is the biggest winner.
It's the only one. The new parties that actually gained, Clement.
That have gained. But I'm saying this because you're talking about the leftist organization.
Yeah.
And I'm saying the EFF is one of those. If you're saying that South Africans are rejecting the neoliberal organizations and are moving towards the left, the EFF should probably be at 18% now, and they're not even at 15%.
But if you look at the votes of the EFF, of the ANC and other parties that even, for instance, the MK party that campaign on populist left rhetoric, that's what the people responded to.
Do you think they responded to their policies and not the leader of the party and his influence?
No. How can the people respond to a leader who has almost collapsed this country? The people didn't respond to that. The people responded to real questions. For instance, they elevated the question of the land. A fundamental question of this country. It's not their question. It's a question that is the basis for the establishment of the African National Congress. The land is not back in the hands of the people. We launched Mawubuya Umhlaba campaign as the Communist Party way back in 1995, just after the first organization to respond to the property question. Many other things that we did try to do in this question of the land. It has not yet been back in the hands of the people. We have a restitution process that has actually fundamentally failed to return the land back to the people. We can go across the country. We had, for instance, last year had a meeting with communal property associations, and we reported this even to the Minister of Land Affairs, Comrade Togo Didiza, to the extent that the land is back in the previous owners who stole it from the masses of this country. And
it's because of the people you're in a relationship with, the ANC. You're in alliance with them. They're in power, but they've allowed that to happen.
Yes, of course. The issue is not much about allowing that to happen. They created a framework, a legal framework. That framework has been abused by force of capital. Now we are saying they must pass an appropriate legislation that could not allow the land that is transferred back to the people to be taken by other means, the way in which, for instance, the currently returned restitution framework has been abused by forces of capital, including these forces in the DA in the main.
So Mapaila, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for engaging with us tonight on Face the Nation. We ask you a question tonight about the 400 people that are now headed to Parliament. What are you expecting from the new players like the MK Party, Rise Mzansi, Action SA, the Patriotic Alliance, BOSA and others? Do you think their addition to Parliament will help strengthen accountability over the executive? Or are you expecting more of the same? What do you want them to prioritize? Some of your tweets have come through. SACP says there are just a few members that I think will make a difference in strengthening accountability in Parliament, but 58 members are definitely going there to cause chaos. Melikaya says, hi Clement, my observation over the last 6 administrations has always been new members, but same avoidable habits and elitism, big unjustified salaries for the performances we are exposed to, let alone the gangster-like security detail for people that claim to be representing us. Vincent says members of parliament must prioritize service delivery and get rid of crime. We'll read more of your tweets and also play some of your WhatsApp voice notes before we wrap up the show. When we come back, we're going to have a conversation about the markets. Are we centering the markets and investors more in our conversation about coalition government, or are we centering the people who have expressed their will through the ballot? That conversation coming up next with Professor Thuli Madonsela. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, Secretary of Parliament Xolile George has now officially received the list of elected representatives who will make up the National Assembly for South Africa's 7th Parliament. George says the legislative body will continue to champion for the advancement of women. In the 6th administration, 45% of the members of Parliament were women. However, the 7th administration will see a decline in female representation. Xolile George joins us now in studio. Thank you so much for making time for us. So what's next now? You've received the list from the IEC that then came from the political parties. What's the next process?
Well, good evening, Clement, and to all the Face the Nation viewers. From today's proceedings, the ball is effectively on Parliament's court in terms of preparing for the first sitting of the National Assembly, as well as the first sitting of the National Council of Provinces. Remember, Parliament has got 2 houses. So the first sitting will be the National Assembly. And the National Assembly is a 400-seat parliament in terms of composition. So it will be the first one to sit. And that will happen as soon as the Chief Justice determines the date and time when such a sitting will take place. So we are keenly awaiting the determination of the Chief Justice. What has happened today, we have now received the list, which will help us start the preparations in terms of onboarding of members, keenly awaiting the date where we will be swearing in all the members which the Chief Justice will preside over, and also deal, Clement, with the election of office bearers, meaning starting with the Speaker of the National Assembly, and then thereafter the Speaker of the National Assembly that shall have been so duly elected after a voting process will, upon announcement of the results by the Chief Justice, then proceed to the seat to preside over the election of the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly. Again, election will take place through a secret ballot, and then thereafter the Chief Justice will then proceed after adjournment to pronounce candidates that shall have been called on the floor as candidates for President of the Republic. If there is one candidate for the Speaker, that person duly nominated with no any other person shall be declared as duly elected into the position. Same principle for the Deputy Speaker. Same principle for the position.
How much
of
time
President.
do you have? Do you have until next week Friday? Because the 14 days came in when? After the results were declared. How much time do you have for all of these processes to unfold?
After the results, Clement, that were declared by IEC on Sunday, the 2nd of June, counting from the 3rd, it's 1 full day's day 1. The Constitution prescribes a maximum of 14 days. So it says the first sitting of the must take place within 14 days. So from Monday the 3rd, we count. It will then end on Sunday the 16th of June. That's the last day of the 14 days. However, there are other legislation that govern that process. For instance, we all know the 16th of June is a public holiday. It's a June 16. But in our National Holiday Act that was passed in 1994, Public Holidays Act rather, it also makes provision in Section 4 that any day that ends on a Sunday, the next day shall be regarded as a day for observation of that holiday. Meaning that from that provision, you also go to the instrument of interpretation, which is the Interpretation Act of 1936 that also provides in Section 4 for the determination and counting of the days within which official sittings can take place. It gives you exclusive of the first days and inclusive of the last day, meaning in a typical scenario like us, 14 days, you will have to count the day of Monday as also included. So that's the 14 days within which, so we contemplate that possible anywhere between 17 and 18 that could take place.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about the lists that have now been submitted. Can political parties make any amendments now that the list has officially been submitted by the IEC? And what happens if some of the people appearing on the list have been expelled? For instance, in the case of the MK party, one of their leaders or former leaders has now been expelled but still appears on the list. Does that mean that they then are automatically kicked off as soon as you've got communication from the party confirming their expulsion? How does it work?
Clement, there is a regime that governs any process. In this process, IEC has played its role. It is now on the side of Parliament to play its role in accordance with the Constitution. The Electoral Amendment Act, the Act of 1973 that was passed in 1998, as amended, makes provisions on the issue of lists in terms of how they must be amended and what order to be followed. The first aspect of that process is about the revision of the list. When can a list be revised? It makes provision that that can only happen after a year, meaning 12 months. And then you will be able to count that 12 months from the time members are sworn in. Then you will be able to count the full 12 months when such review of a list can take place. That's the first aspect. Generally, nothing happens. You can only do that after a year as a party. The second part is what we called supplementation of a list. When can you supplement a list? A list can only be supplemented if the current numbers were to be exhausted. Let's say a party has got 3 people or it has got 6 people. For whatever reason, in a year or whatever period, there are no longer members that are 3 or 4. You supplement the list, and there's provision that governs that. The third aspect is about replacement in a list, which likely your question seems to be falling in that category. We call it filling a vacancy in terms of the procedures of Parliament. When does such circumstance happen? It happens, Clement. For instance, the IEC has declared that the National Assembly has 400 seats. The list we have received today as gazetted has got Clement number 1, it has got Alvin number 10, and your party may have secured 25 seats out of 400, as an example. If it has secured 25 seats and Clement resigns, indicates that I am no longer available to take my seat, which is already Clement's seat as per the determination of the list, then what happens then is about replacement, filling a vacancy. In the order of the IEC, if Clement was number 10 out of 25, number 11 falls down to number 10.
But what happens when there's expulsion? When the party says this person is on the list, has been expelled, what happens in that instance?
They are declared members already. So you are required in due process to find out from the member concerned. We have received this from party A, and it indicates that you have been expelled or whatever process that it is. A person is going to indicate, yes, it is so. However, I'm taking the matter under review, or whatever that the person shall have exercised his or her right. Remember, it doesn't denude you of your rights and that you are guaranteed in the Constitution and any other law. So in that particular case, it is important for Parliament, upon receipt of that, to be able to be in contact with the member concerned. Please indicate, so that process does not prejudice anyone else, neither the party concerned nor the person. The question of Audi then applies.
All right. Olile George, Secretary to Parliament, thank you so much for making time for us on Face the Nation tonight. Now, investors are watching ongoing talks among the various political parties as the governing ANC considers the parties with which to enter into a coalition government. But are investors being centered more than the people in our conversations about a viable coalition. Professor Nhlamulo Ndhlela joins us now via Zoom for that conversation. Prof, thank you so much for making time for us. So much debate around coalitions and what that partnership is probably better for the stability of the country and what's better for the markets. In your view, are we centering the markets more than the people? What's been your observation?
Greetings, Clement, and the viewers. I think some newspapers in at least one political party is centering the markets more than the constitution and the people. The markets are very important, so I'm not going to say ignore them, but a country is a system and the world is a system. And if you're dealing with a system, you think you need systems thinking and design thinking. What am I trying to achieve? And again, stability is not only based on the behavior of the markets, it's also based on your social license to operate. So you have to look at all of your factors, and then having weighed all of them, you make your choice. The people have spoken, and the people want more change and more radical change, not less of it. And you can't ignore that.
So how do we then balance the two? Because, you know, there are people who are on the one side who say, as you indicate, the people have spoken, and the markets or investors or business people that are interested to invest in this country or already investors in this country need to understand and appreciate that democratic process. But at the same time, some people on the other side say, but the markets ultimately, when you take a decision that's in the best interest of the market, ultimately is in the best interest of the people, because the rand becomes stronger if there's a good business operating environment in the country, when there's policy certainty in the country, the price of fuel, the price of food. There's a consequence to the ANC also considering what the market's expectation is. So the question then is, how do we balance the two? Or is that not a conversation we should be having of the balance?
No, it should be a conversation that we are having, but we must also know that markets are engaged with. If you engage with the markets about the importance of bringing everyone on board, or at least all critical stakeholders on board, and centering everything on social justice, eventually the markets will adjust. I mean, surely the markets should know that South Africa has shown resilience, has shown commitment to the rule of law, and just everything is hanging together. But ignoring the will of the people is not good for the markets, because it gives you a semblance of orderliness. And halfway down the line, you're not going to get stability. I was just in an event right now where somebody who's in charge of Westgrow, which is the development agents of the Western Cape, says her mandate is not equality. Her mandate is to sell the Western Cape. If there are black people who come, that's okay, but her mandate is not to advance equality. That's somebody else's job. But according to the Constitution, the mandate of everyone within the state is to ensure the realization of human rights. That's a requirement under Section 7(2) of the Constitution, and putting the Constitution first is a requirement of Section 237 of the Constitution. So we can't have a coalition where some people think advancing equality is a choice, not a constitutional duty.
Yeah. And it's pretty clear now, Prof. I mean, I was reading a statement from Fitch where they also express, I think, their favor for an ANC-DA coalition. There are many other stakeholders that have come out to say that is a coalition that they think will bring about stability. When you look at the ANC, their policies and their ideological positioning, and you look at the Democratic Alliance as well, and their policies, whether you look at their policy around race, they don't think that race is actually a proxy for disadvantage. They don't necessarily believe in the national minimum wage. When you look at their policies, between the ANC and their ideological position, do you see that as something, as much as the markets would appreciate, would be in the interest of the majority of people in this country?
No, and it won't be in the interest of the markets, because the markets themselves are not looking for temporary stability. They're looking for long-term stability. Quite interestingly, I don't know which markets we're talking about. You know, I was in Kenya recently and had a colleague from the World Bank who laughingly said to me, we have one of the most right-wing treasuries in the whole world. And that's the World Bank that is concerned about market stability. And market stability is built when everyone feels democracy is working for them, when everyone feels there's an opportunity for them to advance economically, when they work hard, when they feel that there's social parity for them, and that they can be whatever they were designed by God to be without barriers. And that is impossible in our current pyramid scheme that was created by Cecil John Rhodes and subsequent apartheid people. You do need to advance equality. So maybe my short answer is yes, we need to look at markets, but they're not the only factor. But secondly, if Western markets are a problem, we're part of BRICS, we're part of China, we're part of Brazil, then we can look into those markets as well.
Professor Nhlamulo Ndhlela, always appreciate your time. Thank you for engaging with us on Face the Nation tonight. Let's wrap the show with some of the WhatsApp voice notes that have come through with the question we've been asking you tonight around members of parliament that are going in for the 7th parliament. What are you expecting, especially from the new players?
Hi Clement, this is Pascal Mukum from Loli in Johannesburg South. Look, the new MPs and MPLs, I believe, at the first year, or the first coming years sitting in the parliament, they will be giving much force, demanding service delivery and all such things which is needed to the community. But as time goes by, their force will be reducing. So that will mean they are starting to join the big bosses now.
Good evening. My name is Ella Cindy. I'm a student at St. Leonard's Secondary School and a politician in making. The MPs should prioritize the following: clear communication and negotiation, shared goals and priorities, mutual respect and trust, effective leadership and decision-making processes, strong institutions and governance structure, active citizen engagement and participation.
Thank you very much for your WhatsApp voice notes and your tweets as well. And thanks for watching Face the Nation tonight. We'll be back on Tuesday at 8 p.m. Thanks for watching. Have a good night. Cheers.